Hey there, welcome to saas.unbound podcast. I'm your host, I'm Nadeina, head of growth at saas.group, a serial acquirer buying wonderful SaaS businesses to take them to the next level. And here I chat with inspiring founders and experts to get an inside scoop on how they made their business a success. And today with me is Stine, CEO and co-founder of Openli, helping companies comply with the GDPR and scale their privacy efforts. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Anna. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm really glad you're here because, well, honestly, quite a few podcasts I had with the founders when they said one thing I wished I kind of doubled down on a bit earlier than I did was security and compliance because we didn't know it would be such an issue. We didn't know that it will be stopping us from moving up market for so long, and then we would have all this damage control to do. So really fascinated to have you here and kind of unlock all this knowledge. But let's start with your background first, and how you got to build Openly in the first place.
Yeah. So my background, if we take it the more kind of like professional background story, well, I graduated law school, then took the kind of like classic route of going to private practice, like a law firm, a big one. I'm from Denmark. So I went and worked for one of Denmark's biggest law firms for 6 years, having clients like Google and Netflix and HBO. So privacy in tech is something I've been doing kind of like almost forever. Then, like at one point, I represented a big VC firm kind of coming out of the UK who wanted to invest in a Danish startup. And I was asked if I wanted to do the due diligence, the transaction, and like all the paperwork stuff. And I said, cool, that'd be fine. And I did that. And afterwards I was asked, oh, Stine, like, would you be up for kind of like doing a secondment for a few months? Because this startup called Trustpilot don't really have anybody in legal and they just need somebody just to help a little. And I thought, okay, that'd be great. But then I'm definitely heading back to the law firm because like that was where my kind of like career projection was going. And I came in, I remember this going up to the third floor. This was just in an apartment in Copenhagen and like the classic kind of startup, right? And I knocked on the door and like the door is opened by the founder called Peter and in flip flops and white tennis socks, like totally classic, right? And he just stood there and gave me the biggest hug and said, "Welcome." And I thought, okay, this is different than me sitting in like my really like black suit and blues shirt, right? And so I came in, and very, very early on, I felt the magic of being a part of a startup, where higher energy, everybody's pitching in, everybody's making a difference. You have no idea where this adventure is going to end. It can go like sideways. It can go like as a rocket ship and really move fast. But the whole kind of like feeling of being part of that journey, I found to be super motivating. And when Trustpilot therefore asked a few months later if I wanted to stay on, I said I would love to. And so I joined as the first one in legal. And at that point, Trustpilot were 80 people. And I came in and I helped build out the legal team and the processes and everything. And when I left Trustpilot 6 years later, I had a team a little below 50 people reporting to me. And at that point, GDPR had come into force, and that was my responsibility. And we were in 80 different countries, 60 million users, and it was a challenge. And so I was sitting one day around the lunch table complaining a little. And my co-founder today, but back then, he had worked at Trustpilot as the first product manager, and he was there, and he started asking me, Stine, if you're sitting there and like having issues, what are everybody else doing? They need to be as compliant. They need to do the same work. And so why aren't there somebody out there that's really taking that workload away? We should be doing that. And I was kind of like at first, great idea, son. You do what that idea, and I'll be here rooting for you. And he came back a few weeks later and, come on, Stine, we should be doing this. And we started like talking about it, and I could feel the butterflies starting to flap. And so we founded Openly. And today, well, we have customers in 14 different countries, mainly in Europe, but starting actually to get more and more traction in the US, and helping companies really automate privacy and GDPR, and giving them the insights you need, because GDPR is more than just creating some spreadsheets and some templates and then putting it like where the sun doesn't shine. It's something that you actually need to work on, but it doesn't have to be that hard, and it doesn't have to be on you. And so that's where Openly is coming in.
Okay, that's a great story. Wow, very inspiring. And this well, it's been 6 years, but what were the first steps? Like, obviously, I mean, I also remember when GDPR came into place, and everyone was like, "Okay, that's an end of an era." So, like, there's no more free internet or something. Like, it was terrifying at first, and yeah, how did you go to people like? Did you ask them like, do you want to deal with it yourself because we have figured it out? Did you offer it as a service first? Like, what was the story there?
So if we're looking at the story of Openly, we actually spent quite a lot of time figuring out what was the pain that we could solve in a way where we really were able to make a difference. And in full transparency, that actually took a bit of time. I think we spent 2.5 years at least, just trying to figure out how to and what to do. And at one point, I just started kind of like talking to companies and customers and saying, okay, if we're able to do this, and then describing the pain, would you buy it? And when I heard, because like these were some of the pains that I had, but I didn't think necessarily just because I had that problem that everybody else had it. Right? Never fall in love with your own idea. You have to test it and test it and test it. So I asked companies, and then when we started getting more and more of the companies saying, "Oh, that would be amazing. That would be amazing." Well, okay, well, now we know what to build, right? And build it in a way where we can actually scale it. So I think that is for us the key learning, that it actually takes time to get product market fit, and in all honesty, much longer than I had anticipated.
Oh, absolutely. But now you're working with like super big names. So how did you determine your ICP? How did you sell this idea to the big
Mm.
names?
So to begin with, we've always been really good at selling to startup and scale ups. I think also because of the mindset we're coming with and the backgrounds that we have as founders. So to begin with, we were selling a lot to like founders, and we still do. They really love the platform, but what I could see is that often they really didn't fully grasp the magnitude of how we were actually really solving a workload. And so I started like talking to in-house legals, just they're peers of mine, right? Because I have the same similar backgrounds. And it really fast stood out that they appreciated the pain we were taking away to a higher degree than the founders. The founders also understood, but because legal were actually sitting with it, they really understood also how many hours of work we were removing from their desks. And I think that has actually been something that a lot of companies haven't been thinking about to the same extent. Like nobody would ever challenge the CFO who would say, I need a tool to manage all our invoices and all the expenses and the payroll. Of course you need a tool. And when marketing is saying, I need a CRM system, everybody's saying, of course you need a CRM system because you need your MQLs, and sales need their SQLs. So when legal is saying, I need a tool to manage our privacy, why is that any different than anybody else?
Good point. Yeah. But to the point that I mentioned earlier, like founders coming to the podcast and saying, we never thought that would be an issue. And we only later, when we tried to move up market and getting bigger clients, then we started talking about compliance and security. So, in your point of view, like, what is a good time to start thinking about security and compliance and getting a bit more sophisticated about that?
I think the easy answer is it's never too early. Like it's much easier to do it right from the get go. But having said that, when you're a young company, you might not even know what your company is actually offering because you're still building product or you're still trying to figure out what it is that you're doing. So it can be difficult to then say, okay, let's prioritize working on compliance. We don't earn any money, so let's go out and buy a tool. That really doesn't justify it, right? What I can see and where I think the tipping point is as soon as you start getting commercial traction and you know, okay, we have this product offering, we're going to the market and we're starting to get customers on the platform. Like maybe not your first three, but at least like early on. Well, if you do it already at that point, it's going to get much easier and over time actually also much cheaper than coming in at a later stage because it costs so much more to clean up versus actually just having a nice tidy house from the get-go. It's kind of like having a house, right? If you build a new house, amazing, you anticipate that you don't need to do any type of reconstruction on it for the next 20 years. If you don't do anything during those 20 years, the bill and the problems are going to rack up. And at one point, you have to almost not demolish the house. I'm not like that drastic, but you need to change the windows, the doors, the electricity, the plumbing, and so forth because you haven't been maintaining it. And I think you should be thinking about security and compliance in the same way. That is a core fundamental principle for having a proper business today. And in many scenarios, I would go to the extent and say it's actually your license to operate. And what do I mean by that? Well, you also alluded to it in the beginning. Like, if you want to sell to enterprise companies, they will expect and require a certain level. And if you don't have anything, well, then you have to kind of either lie, and that's not an option, or you have to then drop everything you have and do your best. The problem is, in many scenarios, that isn't very good. And you end up with patchworks. So if you do it earlier on, when you start to have that commercial traction, well, you will be saving money and time.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense. So, working with many companies coming to you and kind of seeing their setup, what are the usual issues that companies have when they come to you at a point when they need something quick and they want, they it's their first enterprise customer, they want the compliance, they want the security, uh, and there is none of it. What do you see people and founders teams can neglect in this process?
So firstly, like you started asking, when do we often see them? Well, we often see them in different scenarios, right? You get the first enterprise customer, they start saying, oh, can you explain what are your GDPR efforts and who are your sub processors? Just to name a few of the things. And you start thinking, oh my God, I have no idea what they're asking us about. Or you might have an idea and then you'll be trying to do your best. We also see it in connection with fundraising when you want to get new investors on board and all of a sudden the due diligence in connection with that transaction comes closer, or like just in general you want to go into new markets. So what we often see is American companies in that regard coming to us because they want to enter into Europe, as an example, and now we need to get our stuff in order. So that's when we see them often. And then there are just some where the founder is coming to the conclusion, okay, I cannot use any more time on this, I need somebody to help us. Or legal is hired and legal will say, back to your own, okay, I need some tools to help me because I cannot just do this by just manual labor and spreadsheets. What I often see in those scenarios is that they do have some core fundamental things in place, like they will have a privacy policy on their website, They will have what is called the data processing agreement, which is the standard agreement you would have in place with their customers. But they don't have a lot of documentation. And what they really, really lack is some kind of setup where they're actually doing this on a regular basis. So operationalizing it. Because GDPR and privacy and security isn't just something you do 14 days a year and then, oh, you have a reminder in your calendar, I need to do this again. This is an ongoing thing you need to work on continuously. And if you don't have a tool to support you, it's not ingrained in like just running, just functioning. It would be the same as, like, let's say you were having tracking on your website, and that tracking would only work 2 weeks a year. And then you would look at the data 2 weeks a year and you would think, oh, so what? How many visitors do we actually have and how is it going? And then you would look 2 weeks again the year after. That wouldn't really solve anything. It wouldn't give you
Right.
the insights, and it wouldn't increase your compliance and your security levels. So that's where I see the biggest gap in the majority of cases.
Okay, thanks for breaking it down for marketers. But yeah, also I wanted to ask you about AI. Right? How did AI add to your workload? How is it changing? What's going on in security and compliance, and how to when if you're adopting AI into your product, how to do the vetting, or how if you want to kind of power your tool with AI, how to make sure that it's secure in the first place. Yeah, sorry, many questions, but a broad topic.
Yeah, so if we start with AI, what we're seeing, like from a company perspective, is AI is changing a lot, or changing a lot of ways of working. But what we can also see is, like, we're supporting companies with privacy and compliance, and as part of that, we're also supporting them with AI compliance. And what's happening right now is so many of all our customers' vendors are implementing AI into their core product, their platform, their SaaS tools. And if you're sitting as in-house legal and you're thinking, I need to figure out how do we as a company make sure that our data isn't used to train like AI models, and that we're not sharing personal data in a way that's non-compliant. One thing is, you might be like considering, should we use OpenAI, just as an example, ChatGPT, as like helping different departments. But what is happening is that many of your SaaS tools and tech tools are implementing AI without your knowledge. Like LinkedIn has implemented AI, right? HubSpot. And so one of the biggest struggles that our customers are seeing right now is just knowing where is AI being used, and figuring out, is our confidential data shared? Are we all of a sudden training different models with our core business data? Just as an example, that's some of the challenges we're seeing. And then there's definitely also a lot of complexity around the whole privacy and AI. And given what we're doing as a company, that is something, of course, that we're very focused on supporting the customers with, and scaling their compliance and efforts in that regard.
And is there any plan to add AI to Openly? Because also had a conversation about that and with another company, and they're like, yeah, sure, like we do need it inside our tool as well, because it could potentially speed up our processes so much. So is there any plan for Openly to use AI in the near future?
I think all companies right now, regardless almost of what they're doing, are sitting and looking at ways to support either their platforms, their offerings, or their internal teams on using AI. And of course Openli is also doing that, and we do have some plans. I think what is at core here for us is making sure to do it in a way where we're not compromising the core mission of what it is that we're doing, and do it in a way where there is an option for our customers to be in control, so
Okay.
they decide.
Okay. All right. So they decide. But what about your internal processes? Um, is there a way that you want to implement AI for your internal processes? So like it doesn't really um, touch any of the operations of your customers, just for your internal use.
I think there is a lot of opportunity, for example, with, let's take a classic function like the marketing teams, where you have the option of really creating a lot of amazing content really, really fast. But having said that, and also mindful of my background, you don't want to be creating content with copyright issues. You don't want to be creating these amazing graphics and let's say blogs and stuff, which is built without any type of notion to the potential copyright issues. So what we've done so far at Openly is maybe be slightly conservative, not in regards to the opportunities that arise with AI, but in the context of making sure we know what we're doing and not just jumping right in. I've seen so many companies just saying, we need to implement AI. We need to implement it now because otherwise we're going to lose out. And at one point, you end up in a way where you are hurting your business more than you're benefiting from the AI.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, I really wanted to know your opinion on that because, we also play with, content and AI, obviously, as marketers. That's what we do. So it's really interesting how, people who are in the security and compliance game think about it and see it as potentially a risk for a company or potentially not a risk at all. Just something to be mindful of. But another question that I wanted to ask was about your structure, your pricing, your product growth. And as far as I understood, when I went to the website, I couldn't find the pricing. It's you have to contact the sales team, and so you guys is sales led, like completely, right? So why did you decide to go that way? Are there any limitations to your growth because of that, or is this completely intentional because you have to kind of go there first, see what the setup is, see how you could be helpful, and maybe there is some kind of service added to it that helps you then build a better, more customized setup for each customer.
So when you're saying we are completely sales-led, I think all companies that are earning money that is not an NGO are sales-led. Just like full stop. I don't think anybody
Yeah,
that
I'm just
has a
comparing
like,
product led growth and sales led growth. So
but
this
then
is
we're
not
actually
the
not sales-led.
okay.
We're actually much more community-led, and that's the way we're actually selling. And not, and we don't do any type of outbound any kind. So in that regard, no, then we're not sales led. But what
Okay.
we do know, and then what I personally feel more comfortable with, is when you are in the space of selling privacy and compliance tools, you need to make sure that the customer that you are about to sell to know what they're buying and also understand the different tiers. And so that's why we feel that it's important actually to have a conversation so we can explain. And I think everything around sales today needs to be very focused on guiding. The best sales reps are the ones that aren't selling, but more being consultative. supportive. If you're just like stuffing stuff down their throat, the likelihood of the customer churning later will increase dramatically. And so by having that conversation and aligning expectations, but also making sure that the package that the customer is buying is actually the one that fits the best. And sometimes that's actually the cheapest. And sometimes that's maybe the medium package or whatever you want to call it, because that's where the fit is the best in terms of what their struggles and the size of, let's say, the potential issues that they are facing.
Yeah, absolutely. So how are you building that dialogue with your customers? How do you find them in the first place? Is it that the community, because I know you also have legal and privacy community that you're running. There is a newsletter. So is it, that community-led growth that you're talking about? So people kind of just try the product and then talk to others and it grows, and it's a big word of mouth kind of situation, or yeah, how are you finding them in the first place?
So for us, the community has many different, I think, great benefits. So firstly, it has the benefit of functioning as, let's call it, top of funnel awareness, members signing up, listening to what we have to say in terms of like the privacy newsletter that we have. We're really trying to just make a newsletter that is much more about like, this is what's going on in the legal and privacy landscape, which can be super difficult and maybe a little bit nerdy in many cases. And then trying to say, okay, so what will this mean for you? And so that's the way we've gone to market, which works really well for us. And then I think by us then having that community, people get interested in how we're then working with privacy and compliance and check out the platform, and from there on build sales conversations.
Okay, I think that's really smart because you at first mentioned that you were actually talking to the legal team, so you're talking to the stakeholders right away. So people get, well, it might be nerdy, right? But it's their domain, so they get a bit more news, a bit more, trends, what's going on. So I think it's a really great approach to doing that. All right, but is it also kind of a way to educate what's going on? And I feel like it's kind of the hardest thing when you have to educate your customer, like what's going on, like why they have to buy your product. But also, what has been the kind of the biggest growth lever there when you're trying to teach people what they have to do in terms of security and compliance?
Well, the good part is when you have people working in-house in legal, they know what they need to do. Because like that's their core responsibilities, right? So you don't need to sit there and educate them. Where with the founders, well, you do need to tell them because they have like, they do know about that GDPR thing, but what does it actually mean and what does it like require? And like, I don't know. I do, but they don't. So there's a lot of education going on, but you don't need that for the legal and the privacy teams and the security teams because they're experts in their domain. So for that, I think it's more just the awareness of there are actually tools out there, or there is one tool out there that can do this, which they didn't know. And so for that reason, the community really works as actually educating on this could be automated. You don't need to sit and do this. There's actually
Right.
a platform that can take away the workload because they're sitting and doing it already.
Right. Yeah, and I could totally see how for founders, for smaller teams, when there is maybe no legal team yet, but they are starting to look at enterprise customers, this is something to fall onto. Like there is this, newsletter or podcast or whatever that talks about that specifically. So when we have our legal, we can actually go to them and say, hey, have you seen that?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think it's also often, I think like there, a lot of conversations going on right now is super feature focused. Like, we have this new feature, it's so great, we can do A, B, and C. Often, like, a potential customer aren't looking for a feature, right? They're looking for something that can remove a pain, or something that can make their lives easier or make them shine more. And so I think often it's easier if you know your audience, because then you also just have a much stronger value proposition, because you can speak their language.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So, what is there anything? Because I would assume that in your newsletter and on your talks, you're talking about, just judging by your LinkedIn thread as well, you're talking a lot about the changes and the trends and like what's going on, and like you said, GDPR is an ongoing kind of work that you have to look into on ongoing basis. So what are the changes that are coming that you're maybe excited about, uh, thrilled, I don't know, terrified, that you could share, maybe others could look into or read in your newsletter?
So I think there are different aspects depending on whether or not you're asking me as a kind of founder and CEO of a privacy tech company. Then there's me as a individual with kids and where society is going. And I think for me, there are actually two very different things going on right
Let's
now.
start there.
So if we start there, I think with, for example, AI incoming, there are so many moving parts in the way society is structured. And so what I mean by that, so a good example, Klarna, like a big Swedish payment provider platform. They implemented an AI assistant. And this AI assistant is now helping if you're writing and asking for support. And they made a press release around it, and I wrote about it on LinkedIn. And so they implemented this on the basis also of using OpenAI, and that's totally fine. That's not the problem. What they found out is that this AI assistant is amazing, right? It responds so much faster. It actually gives better, more specific advice, and it can handle so many different languages. So all in all, a fantastic solution. They also found, after having implemented it for 1 month, that it can replace 700 FTEs. So 700 support agents in Klarna alone. Now, let's imagine that all tech companies will be implementing these solutions within the next, let's just say 12, 24 months. All of a sudden, we will see a massive, well, potentially massive amounts of layoffs. That's one thing, but also a gigantic change in what type of jobs are available. If you're sitting there and you're a founder, you would think, okay, great, that's amazing. And that's why I'm saying, let's look at this in two different aspects, right? Now we're looking at it from Stine, an individual. Is society today ready for that big of a change? For having so many people all of a sudden with like either no job or in need of a really, really fast shift in the work that they're doing. We've had this, like the changes that happened last century, where we got like the engines and the industrialization of societies. That changed, of course, but it's never happened this fast, meaning society will not be able to keep up at the same pace as the way that we're pacing with AI. So we cannot adapt to the same speed. And all of a sudden, there will be a massive wave coming. And we're not completely ready for that wave. And that's something I worry about. I also worry about elections, in all honesty, because it has never been easier. And think we're just at the early break of like dawn when it comes to the use of AI. So how will this be impacting elections going forward? How will we know what is fake? How will we know what is right? What can we trust? Because right now we're trusting a lot of what we're reading on social media. And YouTube last week, that's also something I'm writing about on LinkedIn. As an example, said, well, if you're creating AI videos for LinkedIn, now you as a LinkedIn creator need to tick off a little box. If you used AI and created something that actually looks real, but it's not.
Yeah,
So
saw it
that's
on
on
YouTube.
you. Yeah, that's on you, YouTube creator.
Hmm.
What is the likelihood, if you want to manipulate elections, that you'll be clicking off that little box?
A lot more questions than answers right now. I'm totally there with you. I mean, elections are um, well, problematic as they are already, but I totally get what you're saying with we're trusting a lot in social media, but it's also, we're trusting one thing this week and totally different the other week. So what about Stine, the CEO, the co-founder of Openli? What are you concerned about?
Um, I think I'm concerned, not like for Openly per se, but I'm concerned with, again, the pace of the implementation of AI. And I can see so many of our customers are trying to get on top and trying to do the right thing when it comes to AI compliance. But just look at that and look at how much new legislation is coming out. From a business perspective, it's a great opportunity for Openly, so that I'm not concerned about. But if you then think about like the US right now, I think the last thing I heard, like the New Jersey, for example, just released new privacy laws, right? They cannot agree on a like state level, federal level, what they mean. So they're implementing state laws. And now we have what, 13, 14, 15 different states with different legislation on privacy alone. There are 50 states, right? And if nothing happens, all of a sudden, there will be 50 different laws just in the US alone that you need to comply with. However, will you ever be able to manage? At one point, we potentially end up with kind of like fatigue. Like you're getting tired of so much new legislation coming out. You can't keep up, and you're kind of like, oh my freaking god! Like, can this continue? I'm giving up, and that's what you then end up doing, right? And so that's what I'm afraid of, just from a kind of idealistic point of view. From an opportunity perspective, from an Openly, it creates, of course, new opportunities, because by the increasing complexity of laws, it's becoming difficult to keep up. But there will be a tipping point at one point. Like it can just keep on pushing laws down people's throats, because then at one point you simply just can't breathe anymore.
Okay, that's a very valid point. Yeah, I didn't know about what you just said about the US laws. Definitely have to do a bit more research there. But yeah, that sounds like a very anti-utopian thing. So, all right, scary. So, back to you. Back to what has been going on with you and the company. Just a couple more questions. And the first one is, so far, you've had a fascinating journey, lots of difficult, cases and problems to solve. What has so far been the biggest win and the biggest failure? And could be for you as a founder or for the company.
So I think the biggest win for us as a company was launching the Openly community, in all honesty, and our privacy hub. Those two combined was definitely, I think, the tipping point for us, and what really made a difference. The biggest failure for us, I think, in many scenarios, we spent like so much time trying to figure out what was the right product market fit. And I don't think we were fast enough with killing our darlings. Like you often fall in love with like this should be working, like we should be doing and continue, like where I think we should have been much faster in just saying, okay, this doesn't work, let's stop doing it. And we did, but I honestly think we were way too long in doing so.
Okay, learning opportunity. All right. So, what would be the hack that you could share? Maybe, just reflecting on what you just said about the fatigue with, just trying to comply with all the rules and regulations out there. what would you recommend all the founders do if they are looking into it, if they are starting to think about working with bigger clients and starting to become a bit more sophisticated in their compliance? What is the hack that they could use openly?
Um, yep, Openli are great. Um, I'm leaning towards saying don't go to law firms. And then I'm kind of like, I'm a lawyer, so I don't really feel super comfortable with that, because I would always say you would need like specific detailed advice. The reason why I'm saying don't go to a law firm, it's not because I don't think you need to go to a law firm. You definitely need to do that. But what often is maybe even more important is to understand what the problems are, which isn't necessarily something like the law firm will be great at creating a template for or drafting your like terms and conditions. But in many scenarios, that's not where your biggest pains are. But you need those terms, right? Don't get me wrong, that's not what I'm saying. But if we're talking about closing the first customer, it's much around knowing if the customers are asking you these questions, what is it that they're actually asking you? What is it that they're looking for in terms of either documentation or explanations, or a better understanding of what it is that you're doing? And getting a standard document from a law firm can get you a little of the way, but it actually often doesn't actually really solve the question that the customer is asking you to answer. So I think in many scenarios, it's understanding better when the customers are asking you these questions. Why is it? What is it that they're really trying to get? And you can get that by just asking like your network. And not to say that your network is like lawyers and don't rely on their legal advice. That's another little hack, because often they don't know. But like, just ask your network, what have you done when you've gotten these types of questions? And I would say many of them would most likely say, oh, we have these cool tools, or we have these certifications, or we have this standard kind of like Q&A setup that we always can use. And just one little hack, don't ask ChatGPT.
Yeah, I was just about to ask, like, what about, because you said, you obviously need terms and conditions, but you don't necessarily need to go to a law firm. Yeah, can you ask ChatGPT to write it for you? Is it a
Oh,
really
well,
bad practice?
well, you definitely need to go to a law firm to get your terms and conditions. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying, like, just when the customers are starting to ask you about like privacy and compliance questions, what they're often trying to do is get an understanding of your maturity level, which is not answered by sending them your terms and conditions. I think one of the biggest issues I'm seeing actually is when a company is copy pasting the terms from another website. That will bite you in the butt long term, because it doesn't fit your business. It doesn't fit the things you want to do with your business going forward. And if you're just copy pasting the next door neighbor's terms, well, you end up in a situation where you're going to be bound by them, and that's going to pull you down. So I would definitely say you need somebody to help you draft the terms, and that's where I would use the law firm. But I think when you're doing these type of sales conversations, it's more around understanding where the customer is coming from, and that's where I would ask my network, just for you to know, you get a better understanding.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much. I mean, I think it's a really important conversation that we're having, because a lot of founders, just from the talks that I have with founders, sometimes they say, well, you can go on with just terms and conditions for so long before you kind of hit that first big contract. And then, yeah, then you kind of scramble a little bit, but it's all good. But maybe there is a bit more sustainable, more realistic kind of approach to that then gives you an easier way to mid-market and to scaling, and or fundraising or whatever it is you're doing. So thank you so much for sharing this story, and for giving all this amazing advice, and yeah, for being here for your time.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, Anna. It's great to meet you.
Anytime. Thank you and take care.